and welcome to Get the Table, another wrestling roundtable discussion podcast with myself, Adam Wilborn, and the Dudley boys of WhatCulture, Michael Hamflett and Michael Sidgwick, here to discuss another burning wrestling issue. But before we get into it, if you're a fan of this sort of thing, make sure you subscribe to WhatCulture Wrestling on either iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from, for daily wrestling podcasts, where we not only review Raw and SmackDown, but also the Wednesday Night War between AEW and NXT pay-per-views. We have interviews, more roundtable discussions like this one, and a roundup of the week, complete with a bloody good quiz, of course, on WrestleCulture. As I said, though, joined by Michael Hamflett and Michael Sidgwick. And gents, we are gathered here today.
Problematic for you to say this.
To
Gatherings is not a good word now.
It's not a good corporate look.
To talk, I'm not going to help this by saying we're
Still
following
better
this
than dismemberment. So.
by talking about burials, specifically John Cena burials.
The wrestling context.
On a recent episode of SmackDown, he was talking about his history, his feud with Bray Wyatt, and talked about how he ruined Bray Wyatt, and yet he didn't bury anyone. He took all these huge losses over the space of about 15 years and named about 6 of them. He insisted that, it's down to you if you can't get over getting beaten by John Cena. We all know that's not really the case, but I want to sit here and talk about who John Cena buried the most, because he derailed a whole host of monster pushers, didn't he?
I find it quite cathartic that he just said that about Bray Wyatt. I just thought it was quite nice. It's just nice to hear it said somewhere else. Bless him.
I had problems with this promo, but I don't want to sell it because I think the idea was we were meant to get mad, even though he's the babyface and he's the heel. What a ridiculous theme for a storyline this is.
Kind of made the Bray Wyatt Fiend thing make a bit of sense as well. It did actually draw out a bit of logic to that character for the first time.
Indeed. Let's all praise John Cena. Let's all praise John Cena. The thing about John Cena is that there's a lot of discourse to be had about whether he buried anybody, in fact, or whether in this completely heavily booked era of stars where there's nowhere near as much agency to not do jobs, that you might have just been told to say all these things literally word for word. But we know for a fact, it's been reported so many times, that John Cena did have a certain creative agency. He was entrusted to go out, follow a script, but maybe the bullet points of a script, and he delivered them in his own verbiage. John Cena had a tendency to bury just about literally everybody.
He learned from the best against Triple H, of course.
It was just his cadence.
He kind of buried pro wrestling sometimes.
Yeah.
He buried it as a concept a lot of the time.
Just his cadence and his delivery and just his whole body language and behavior. He was just like, hey, I got beat last night, but I don't care about that. I'm here in Green Bay, Wisconsin with all my favorite fans. It's like, right, okay, well, there's no gravity to anything that you do.
Yeah.
You have tacitly buried the idea of narrative development and the gravity of drama just by being your smiling prick self. So he had a tendency to just completely no-sell and underplay just the very concept of drama. And if that sounds histrionic, I don't care. I watched every single week of his reign, but he came back as the rapper last year, so we can reassess his legacy now. Nope. Not having it. John Cena, just his whole promo style, whether it was imposed on him or not, I will still blame him. Ableist wanker that he can sometimes be on Twitter. He just had this tendency, like, there was a steel cage match in 2012 that he was ostensibly trying to sell the way of. It is a violent, in theory, it's a violent grudge match. It headlined a pay-per-view that you had to pay for your hard-earned $60 or 15 quid if you were given the whole sleep tax in the United Kingdom. And he came out the very next night on Raw, and again, it's not a particular person he was burying. It was just the concept of all of this by saying that the steel cage was the Death Star, Vince McMahon was Yoda, he was John Cena Skywalker, and the Big Show was, I don't know, Babu Frick. I know he didn't invite, he wasn't there at the time, but John Cena was just the Babu Frick of professional wrestling for a long time there. Just got my head kicked in by Brock Lesnar at Extreme Rules.
Start us off, Michael Hamflett, then. Who did he bury the most?
For those that can't see this on video, you sometimes have a little crib sheet that we can take from if we need a name, and there is a list of people because he's buried plenty.
Yeah, and I've really reduced it down, if anything.
There is one name that isn't on that list, and it was my first choice in this because I literally wrote a list once of 10 ways John Cena buried The Miz. Now, I always took it a bit like how we hear from Bruce Pritchard that Steve Austin would be backstage while The Rock was cutting a promo saying, I have nursery rhymes, what's going on with that? And Pritchard was like, love this. Biggest star in the whole wide world is threatened by him. This is great. We got 2 of them. And I think there's a little bit of that in The Miz from John Cena. I think there's a very, very, very deeply buried insecurity that John Cena has, not because The Miz is ever going to be like the top star that Cena was, but because we know that Miz works incredibly hard for the machine. He's a Vince McMahon favourite because he'll do the talk shows and he'll do the charity and he'll do blah, blah, blah. And he's a serviceable pro wrestler and he's on his day a pretty good promo. And over the course of about 10 years, in my opinion, it's all unsubstantiated and just a theory, but there are plenty of big occasions where Cena has cut him off at the knees just to remind him where he is in the grand scheme of things. His very first singles feud, The Miz, brilliantly, just came out and called out John Cena every week and then claimed a win. So he was 6-0 up on John Cena by the time they finally faced on pay-per-view. Now, that's a really cool story for a 1-month B show, that all it needs to pay that off is The Miz to have, like, a decent fight against John Cena. Cena wins. I'm not disputing that he shouldn't have beaten him. He gave him nothing. He absolutely battered him for about 6-7 minutes solid, with the implication being that had he shown up in one of those weeks, it would have been as easy as this. So The Miz was left looking completely impotent right at the start of his career. He beat him at WrestleMania, as Cena mentioned in that Bray Wyatt promo. The Miz was the 3rd man in his own title match because he was replaced by The Rock, basically. So that meant nothing, and then Cena took the title off him at the first opportunity where The Rock wasn't in the building. And then the worst one, criminal for me, the Bella twins... the Nikki Bella feud, where The Miz and Maurice put in weeks of fantastic work. That stuff holds up. That total Bella bullshit holds up. They're both brilliant. They both pick everything there was to pick at about Nikki Bella and John Cena's reality TV relationship. No, it's not a comment on what their real life one was. And we all knew it was to build to the proposal. A, did they actually even need to win? Because they could have lost the match and then Cena could have done the proposal. B, watch that match again. They get nothing. It's pantomime stuff. And this isn't The Miz from 10 years ago with Miz 6, Cena 0 on his arm. This is a guy that, like, made the Intercontinental title relevant, that was...
A great feud with Dolph Ziggler, yeah.
Was like a literal main eventer with Dolph Ziggler for that belt against that wrestler on that show. Like, all those things working against him, and he was legit for one of the first times in his career. And I think his legitimacy informed why those promos with Maurice were as good as they were. And I felt like I could see Cena's insecurity all those years, all those times, because I think he saw something in The Miz that made him feel a tiny bit threatened.
Before we get into the next victim, if you watch that match at the Bash, 2009?
Yes, yeah.
At 2009, it's the most bizarre experience because you're just watching a match, if you can charitably call it that, it's just like a one-sided squash. Yeah. I think The Miz gets literally one bit of offense in, and for whatever reason, it just feels like it's been edited. And it's like, all right, the comeback's here. It feels like it's either been glitched or edited in retrospect because it's... John Cena was never particularly graceful with the way he built his comebacks. He'd never like draw on the audience's energy like a good babyface should to inform, right, I've got the fans on side, you're helping me do this. It was just, right, stick this twat, boom.
Even in victory, he was the mayor, Nick Rogers, because it was all without breaking a sweat. He just stood there as if he'd yet to have the match in celebration at the end. It couldn't have looked more like, oh, I've missed a few weeks of television and this dickhead's been like back on his BS. It was patronising, wasn't it, as far as the rest of the match?
Yeah, absolutely, a bizarre one.
Who's the name that immediately leaps into your head when you think about John Cena burials?
Bray Wyatt. Bray Wyatt is the ultimate one, and I think that's why they've decided to proceed with this ongoing storyline as it is, because, again, he beat him at WrestleMania. Oh, he's buried. It's not as if he's like Shaq and Stephanie McMahon and he's threatened by this new guy and he just feels like, no, I have to suppress this because he's going to threaten my spot on the card. Because even in 2014, he hadn't done anything momentous at the previous year's WrestleMania. No, he had, but that was 30 was the beginning of the slow end of his main event run. And in fact, he started getting not demoted, but like he transitioned to an upper mid-card role in 2015 when they realized...
It was the end of the Epics, wasn't it?
It was the end of the Epics. It was a time when I think there was a certain realization that John Cena wasn't going to be the John Cena for a long time. So they felt he was best used getting like titles over the US title or just giving guys more in defeat, if not, in the case of Kevin Owens, outright like just wins over him. But with Bray Wyatt, like, yes, he beat him at WrestleMania. And that wasn't just a burial. It was a booking decision that, for whatever reason, they went with thinking that Bray Wyatt can win one on a B-level pay-per-view and he'll win at the end of the feud, so that means he wins the feud, even though it didn't matter. Like, even in the build-up, right, I went to WrestleMania 30 live, right, And I expected full-on Daniel Bryan mania when I touched down in New Orleans. It's the very reason why I went. Like, other than the fact that my wife said she wanted a kid sooner, so I thought, well, I need to go to WrestleMania to fulfill a bucket list. That's genuinely why I went. But I would not have went were Daniel Bryan not so close to something transformative. Obviously, it didn't because of his injury, but whatever. It felt at the time very transformative. So when I touched down, I was expecting to see a sea of just burgundy and the Yes T-shirts and just to be a part of the Yes movement. What struck me immediately when I was walking around and you've got the so-called belt mutants and just an entire wrestling community descended on one area, there were more Hawaiian shirts and straw hats than there were Yes T-shirts. Bray Wyatt was so unbelievably hot that the actual comparisons I always found so lofty of him being the next Undertaker felt like substantiated.
Really matched the aesthetic as well, didn't it? The Louisiana.
Yeah, it just felt like these people are bang, bang, bang into them. They're willing to receive him as the next Undertaker. And then he just got beat. It's like you've completely lost something here. And the weeks before and the weeks after, because as the feuds often do, it rolled on and on. John Cena described Sister Abigail as, this is paraphrasing, but, well, she must be the ugliest woman alive if she's twin Sister Abigail. The implication being that Bray Wyatt's fat and ugly. He's not this immense supernatural presence that you're meant to be afraid of. He's like a fat guy who would make for a very ugly woman if, in fact, he was genetically identical to a female. It's just the way his promos operated. I always describe him as a witless Rock. With The Rock, you could take Triple H seriously just by surviving those verbal onslaughts. He was never quite like that with Stone Cold Steve Austin. He was just so hilarious with it that you wanted to involve yourself in the story because it was so entertaining by virtue of being The Rock. With John Cena, it was just witless, ineffective, crap stand-up comedy that never elevated a goddamn soul. And it was just impossible to take Bray Wyatt seriously. He could just erode a mystique with a terrible joke just like that. He was your dad.
Like, not to state the obvious, he worked for children. Of course he did. Like, we know this to this day. He said it on that Ruthless Aggression feature on him that he spotted that children were getting into his act, so he was going to tone it down and direct it towards them. Nothing inherently wrong with a wrestler directing his act towards children. But
He's an awful bully.
But I was going to say it came
good role model, mate.
It came at the expense of storylines, and because he was always channeled that way, like the burials that we might speak about here were being used as the examples to set to those children. It wasn't just buy the shirt, it was be the way that I am, and in a lot of those cases he was like needlessly cruel.
Speaking of needlessly cruel, go to the top of that bloody list.
Well, I'm glad you two have left me this one, because this one is arguably the one that stings the most for me. And this was before he was my best friend, of course. Stu Bennett, a.k.a. Wade Barrett. What was the decision making here? There's stages as well to this burial. There's not only the widely criticised decision that Team Cena went over Team Nexus at that SummerSlam, of course, which was so backwards because it was a 2-on-1 at the end, wasn't it? There was
Gabriel and
Justin
Barrett.
Gabriel.
That was Justin Gabriel, yes. Justin Gabriel, Wade Barrett against a fairly injured John Cena at that
DDT'd
point.
on concrete.
Yeah.
Took Andrade out for a month. Yeah.
And he lost that match. And there's all right, okay, it kind of derailed the Nexus's push slightly, it's fair to say. But they were still going. And then they had the bit where they won the match. And therefore, after Husky Harris got involved, John Cena had to join the Nexus. And then he got fired.
What were Nexus visually famous for? When you think of the Nexus, what do you picture?
Just decimation.
Right, but like just any individual member, it's a t-shirt with a giant N on it.
Yes.
Nah, purple t-shirt, John Cena with a tiny little armband. He never, like, that annoyed me so much at the time. It's like, well, I got to make that merch money. Like, you can buy a John Cena t-shirt now in 2020 and he attends like 3 shows a year. Like, him not wearing a Nexus t-shirt felt like a tacit burial, didn't it? Like, I'm a little bit part of this. I'm exactly the width of this armband part of it, and that's as much as I will commit to this bit.
It was just not committed at all, was it? And thus impossible to take seriously.
Well, it was just the whole, people have always speculated, will John Cena ever turn heel? It wasn't even like, he did heelish things because he was contracted to, lest he lose his job. He was always the good guy in the situation, even when he was obliged to aid this team.
He was forced into the group through a loss and then used it to like decimate,
destroy them from
infiltrate
within,
and destroy. I seem to recall a Raw skit where like they won a match because he did the attitude adjustment on David Otunga or Heath Slater onto an opponent. It's like, come on, we've won the match. It's like, you aren't suffering. It looks really fun being held captive. Like, that's backwards. That's a ruined story, like, from the off.
And the whole idea was the followers of Wade Barrett were so distraught and battered by this man, even though there was multiple members of them, this one man could destroy them all, and they had to eventually go to Wade Barrett and say, can't be doing with this. Can't be doing with this. You need to sort this out. You've got the boot.
And this is the fact that this all concludes with a visual burial of Wade Barrett under loads of chairs at TLC.
Boom, 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 boom. How many chairs? You've done enough bloody quizzes. You know the exact number, don't you?
I think it was, I want to say 17, but I'm off the top of my head, maybe 11. I'm not sure.
It was enough to crush him, ostensibly.
And you know,
enough to visually, literally bury him.
Which was his end of days. I would say that the Cork, he was fine. The Cork.
I just took that chair onslaught as, you know, the audience that you're playing to nowadays. You know that we know the language that is used on the inside to describe the events that you're presenting. This is a burial. This is not even a coded burial. I'm watching this man literally get buried under a pile of chairs. Because I know, and you know I know, the infrastructure of all of this, this is a visual aid to helpfully tell me never take that man lying down seriously ever again.
It was
ever again in this role as a main
Spirit Squad
eventer.
in a storage crate or Eric Bischoff in a garbage truck. They do that by design, as you say.
His favourite song's Na 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 Goodbye,
Yeah.
and that's essentially what they were singing backstage in my imagination, cynically warped as it is, when he was under those chairs. Just ridiculous. I mean, I'm not one of the people who goes at him. They buried 7 stars at once when they did the Nexus, because if you look individually at their subsequent runs, there was maybe 1 or 2 stars in that entire group on the main event level by the standards of the time. I don't think either of them could be a main event level star now, but that's besides the point. They could have been then. But Wade Barrett had something. He had something again after that, and what did they do with him again? Not to do with Cena, but they just cut his wings, clipped his wings.
None of them shook the stench. I don't think it took like incredible resilience from Heath Slater, the real life man, to kind of just do what he was told by the company until he became a fixture of it. The rest of them, it's no shock that virtually all of them splintered off into new characters, new gimmicks, or new lines of work to avoid like what they'd experienced in their one big moment.
Right, quickly, let's run through some other names that cropped up. Rusev is another one that's a fairly obvious burial, and again, centers around at WrestleMania.
I don't necessarily buy the Rusev one as much as others, because ultimately, if you look at this through the lens of how WWE produces television with their black and white babyface and heel dynamics and binaries, and the way that they tell stories, ultimately, with Rusev, they wanted to build an upper mid-card foreign menace act, and the hero triumphed in the end. That, for me, was absolutely fine, at least relative to the other things. Like, absolutely fine. They've told a simple, very anachronistic morality play with the John Cena versus Rusev feud, but I never felt like they'd killed Rusev afterwards. I think he got over afterwards. I thought that was just a one-act play of his career. It's typical Hogan stuff, monster of the week. Rusev just happened to be so talented a monster that people projected a different role onto him. Whereas if you look at just the original run, he was a guy for John Cena to beat, just like Earthquake and so many others in the King Kong Bundys were guys for the top star, Hulk Hogan, to beat. I never had a real problem with that. My problem, before Hamflett gives his next thoughts with... And it's not as if he doesn't deserve it or I want to see him on my TV ever again, but just the ugly way that they did Baron Corbin wrong at SummerSlam 2017 was just the hazing practices that you always heard about and thought maybe they've gone away in recent years. With Baron Corbin, the way he was done at SummerSlam 2017 was appalling.
He dropped the Money in the Bank briefcase, and then Cena, pissed about in his match, wore JBL's hat, said, "Oh, this kid don't want nothing." Then just beat him.
I hated this match. It was the opener of SummerSlam, if I remember correctly, when all the build had been around, well, Baron Corbin's getting the John Cena match. This was not yet the full part-time era John Cena. Can't remember which side of the Nakamura match this was, but he'd had the banger with AJ Styles earlier that year. He still had them in him if he wanted to, and if he wanted to get somebody over. I say a banger match. He'd had a banger series with AJ Styles 1 year earlier. He put him over, clean in the middle, in a brilliant match at SummerSlam the prior year. Cena still had it. And wasn't that the problem with Baron Corbin? Didn't he come backstage after a SmackDown segment and just give Vince the nod? He's not got it. And it was just as simple as that. Take the briefcase off him, take his dignity off him. Funny you mentioned hazing, because the use of JBL's hat I thought was quite pointed. It was like, oh, arms around the shoulders, let's just take the mickey out of this guy because we can, and we're doing it on a live pay-per-view. Corbin.
There was an event that developed around the same time where he had a go at the chief doctor of the company, or the big console.
The concussion.
Yes, Joseph Maroon.
Yeah, because he'd come from football background.
Yes.
And he was actually dared to put his head above the parapet a little bit. It just, the whole thing just felt really ugly, and it's tricky, isn't it? Because Corbin has done fine and is clearly a recipient of multiple opportunities to get over some. That's a different subjective debate for another day. But this was a particular occasion where if he'd have been remotely a favourite of any corner of the internet, there would be fury about that to this day, because it's. You watch WWE sometimes and you see pretty callous mistreatment, and these are people's lives. This is their job and this is their career. And in a normal workplace, you wouldn't be allowed to permitted to behave like that.
We mentioned Money in the Bank briefcase. There's a couple of names I want to mention here. Damien Sandow.
Oh, yeah.
I thought that was really rough treatment.
Cena was sometimes the mechanism for a WWE burial rather than feeling like he was at the heart of it. And I think that was the case with Damien Sandow. I didn't feel good watching somebody. That briefcase, for all it's been a little bit abused and it's this giant, very visual gimmick, it does represent something very important in that individual wrestler's career, because theoretically they're going to be the world champion next, and they might sink or swim with that opportunity, but they're going to get that opportunity. And him beating him in the way that he did, the whole setup of it was really thick. The genius character was made to look stupid and then outwitted and out-wrestled in one night.
It was done as a serious concern.
Yeah, like the system completely failed him. But John Cena is so often the guy that's got to be the one. It's not a 8-man firing squad. It's just John Cena with the shotgun right in his face. That's the end of your character. It's dead. And it was a shame to see. I think Cena was personally front and centre, but obviously was never going to turn down the opportunity to do it, because that's what he is. He's the company guy.
Does that same thing sort of apply here when it comes to monsters that Cena's faced? Your Rybacks, as William Regal would say, you manga.
I can't possibly say that John Cena buried Umaga, because give him everything in that phenomenal Royal Rumble 2007 match. After said match, Umaga, who, let's face it, as talented as the man who played the character was the sort of character who wasn't built for the sort of main event run that such a definitive put-to-an-end burial would just ruin forevermore. A character like Umaga has a shelf life, and it expired long after John Cena's involvement with him. I just would never put Umaga on that list personally.
Would you put Ryback on there?
It just felt like WWE had given up on him rather than John Cena was overtly going out of his way, because that's a distinction we should make. Like, with a burial, it's not your favourite performer gets beat or a pushed performer is just completely beat. It might just, cynicism aside, and this is very rich coming from me, I get that, it might just be a creative decision which, being pro wrestling, a pro wrestler has to facilitate by putting it on screen.
Finally, would you say that John Cena buried Zack Ryder? Because it felt like the moment he got involved with Zack Ryder's meteoric rise, it all flew off a stage as quickly as Zack Ryder did in that wheelchair.
So that's the ultimate in both that we've been discussing here. That's both the worst of John Cena's character, which is a man that was wearing a T-shirt saying "Rise Above Hate." So a character Kane comes along and says, "I'm going to make you hate," and Cena says, "I'm immune to everything anybody does, so you can't make me hate." So none of this matters. Absolutely none of it matters except the personal life of this guy, Zack Ryder. So that's the John Cena character, burying everything by default because his character has no other setting. And it's the system that absolutely loathed everything Zack Ryder had dared to do by himself. The prior summer, Triple H...
This was before Tout, let's not forget.
Triple H was pedigreeing Zack Ryder in dark segments to pop the live audience. And even those getting shared by people's grainy phone footage was a tacit burial of Zack Ryder, because everything you're watching on YouTube doesn't matter, because when you see him in a live arena, he doesn't belong on the level with all these WWE guys, even though what he's doing on YouTube is going to drive this massive arm of our business when we finally catch up with the technology that he's monetizing. John Cena, with all the stroke he had, Zack Ryder was genuinely his friend, so he should have done, it's easy for me to sit here and say that, he should have done more to protect the rising career of his friend and help get him over than facilitate a month-long destruction of that career, in my opinion.
Indeed.
It just strikes me that you think of Zack Ryder and you either think of him being pushed off a stage by Kane.
Still, if you're going to do something wrong, do something banter.
It's funny.
Or you think of John Cena necking Eve and it just panning to him like a comedy scene. Comedy neck brace, wheelchair, roses, ooh, a little face.
I can't help but think of them in full character and costume when Vince gives them the story. So there's John Cena looking like an all-action hero in his daft children's gear, but like all the same, looking like G.I. Joe. And then there's Zack Ryder. They've done his makeup with the bruises and they put the neck brace on and then they've put him in the wheelchair. And then Vince saying, are we happy to do this, guys? And like Zack, like, say something. Say something. And like John just says, good to go, boss.
Be remiss of me not to mention Alex Riley, who contends to this day with some evidence that John Cena was overtly, directly out to get him. He would bury him to influential people backstage. A lot of people who saw something in Alex Riley were insistent that there's something there, we should do something with him. And John Cena would just absolutely no sell it, despite like rave reviews on like the house show circuit or for his performances on TV, because you've never seen a guy like Alex Riley, who I always use the example of what he was like on the original NXT. I've never seen anyone in the entire WWE system triumph in a literally impossible situation. Like even Daniel Bryan, who's quite a carefree guy, when he was asked to cut promos on the first NXT season, you could tell it never bothered him, but he was never really comfortable in his
He's
promos.
thinking like, is this working? Is this good?
I know. And you saw so many, like, Brodus Clay who just sat there like a browbeaten sack of crap. Like, what is this? Eli Cottonwood's career, dead quicker than I've done that. Michael McGillicuddy. In my frame of mind, I always think of that word more than Curtis Axel, because dare we forget the moment of the genesis of McGillicuddy. Alex Riley, in contrast, was the cock of the walk. He was so confident. He got, right, okay, what we're going to talk about now? Tripod, right. And then just cut a mint promo about a tripod.
Is there like a proto MJF about him?
Yes,
Like,
absolutely. That's a really good take, actually.
Wasn't as refined as MJF has become, because he's had the spotlight and the support to become that, you know?
Yeah, he wasn't as like natural or just, but he had something so special, particularly in that system. The raved about him in Cena for whatever reason. Maybe it's that, that little bit of jealousy, and his back was up. Just thought, nah, suppress this guy. That's how much he had. That's how much he's shown to me, at least on that second season of NXT.
Well, let us know in the comment section who you thought John Cena buried the most. Did Rey Mysterio dirty, didn't he, on that WWE Championship match? But anyway,
that was just the booking.
He
didn't use the 5-knuckle shovel for that one.
Very good. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And subscribe to What Culture Wrestling on either iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts from for daily wrestling podcasts. Plus, let us know your thoughts on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE. Well, actually, they can follow all three of us. You can follow Michael Hamflett at
Michael Hamflett.
or Michael Sidgwick at.
Before the broadband runs out, at M. Sidgwick.
Follow me at Adam Wilborn. Follow us all at What Culture WWE, as I said. But this has been Get the Table. My thanks to the Dudley Boys. Thank you for watching, and we will see you soon.
Hopefully.